Hello, Michelle.
Hello.
Oops, I can't hear you.
You can hear me? You can't.
There we go.
Okay, good. Thank you.
I just had to turn my speaker on.
Well, that can help. What a beautiful day today.
Wasn't it? I agree. I was able to get out for a bit.
Yeah, I didn't get outside much, but no, well, you know, it is what it is.
It is. Good evening, Carl. Are you feeling better? Recouping?
Feeling better, but a long way to go.
Oh, well, I'm glad at least you're feeling better.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Did you get sick?
No, I had a major operation.
Oh,
My most of my stomach and half my back was purple.
Oh my gosh.
oh, wow. Well, unfortunately, I have recently had to go back on Xarelto, which I hate because every time you like touch me, I turn purple.
Oh, not good.
Yeah.
It's a really strong blood thinner.
Whatever it takes.
Yeah, that's the truth. Well, I'm unfortunately, my Graves' disease is acting up again, which means my thyroid is acting up again and having a little party with my body,
Ooh.
which means I'm back in AFib periodically. So that's why I'm back on Xarelto. It's a mess. It's like you said, Carl, you do what you have to do, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I had my thyroid pulled 5, 7, 8 years ago.
They're thinking of doing that to me because this is I was fine for 2 years. In 2016, I was in AFib 24/7 the whole year. For the same probably reasons, because my thyroid was acting up and producing too much thyroid hormone. And it took a full year for that to settle down for me to get the ablation done and then the cardioversion. And I've been fine for, 2, 3 years. And then all of a sudden, it's having a little party and they're thinking about pulling my thyroid out too. I'm guessing they'll probably have to wait till my T numbers are back in line, but oh
Yeah,
well.
my doctor, I'd go in every year and he'd ask, well, you want to pull your thyroid? And I said, well, let's wait another year. Finally, he quit asking me. He said, well, we're pulling it out.
Well, in the old days, they used to poison it with iodine.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah.
They did. Yeah.
Yeah, they used to kill it off. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
fantastic.
Yeah.
Oh well. Getting old's no fun sometimes. But I did get my first COVID shot last
you
Friday.
did. That's
Oh,
good.
Yeah.
Very good. Where did you get it?
UC Health. I was signed up all over towns, probably 10 different places.
Good.
Last Monday I got, not yesterday, but last Monday I got a thing from Kaiser that said, oh, we see you want a shot, so call this number and we'll tell you what place you are in line. I was 56,000 in line.
Oh my gosh.
Then 2 days later
Wow.
on Wednesday, I get a thing from UC Health that says, guess what? We can schedule you. I was like, yay. So I went on Friday and it was great.
How did they notify you? Just through email?
Yeah, through email.
Oh, okay, good. Because, yeah, I'm a UC Health patient, so that's good to know.
Sign up everywhere. Don't just restrict yourself to UC Health.
Yeah, I have, but I'll be like in the, I don't know. They keep changing the numbering.
I know.
It's like, gosh.
Well, 60 and up starts Friday.
Friday, yeah.
Yeah,
so
supposedly.
Yeah, my husband will be in that wave, and then I'll be in the next one, I guess.
Right.
Mhm.
Well, I didn't have any side effects except for a sore arm. So, but they say the second one's worse. So I don't know.
I think it all depends.
Yeah. Both of my sons had COVID, so I'm happy to get the shot. And I don't want it. They were both very, very miserable. So
Oh, goodness.
not having to go to the hospital miserable, but miserable enough. So
Yeah. Hey, Judy.
Hmm.
My husband just got his first one today, so
Very good.
I heard you talking about the vaccine. So he just
Yeah.
told me my arm just started to hurt like hell. That was just this evening though.
well, I'll tell you, UC Health has it down to a fine science. I was in and out within 10 minutes. It was amazing.
Good.
Yeah.
Oh, I saw Colin. Where'd he go?
I don't know.
Oh.
Yeah, I saw him. Had his head set on and he disappeared.
Hi, Meg.
Hi, everyone. How are you?
No problem. You're good. How many are we expecting tonight, Nancy?
As far as I know, everybody will be here.
Okay, good,
Haven't heard otherwise.
good. We'll try not to frustrate John tonight.
Dan's been doing that job for you this last week.
Oh, okay, all right. Well, thank you, Dan.
My pleasure.
Judy, did you go and take a picture of the side of the frame place? That's that picture that's on the side of their building.
Lindsay at the chamber went around and took pictures of all of the artwork in Englewood, and then you can download them from the chamber's website to use as Zoom backgrounds.
Oh, okay.
So that's where I got it.
I think my computer's too old for that. I've got to buy a new laptop. I mean, I have a newer laptop, but anyway, I've got an ancient one too that I use all the time.
I'm having a little trouble with my video. I very well may need to jump off and back on, but I will try to join on my phone here. So apologize for any inconvenience there.
No problem, Colin. I always sign into these Zoom meetings early because for some reason I run into trouble sometimes logging in. I don't know why. It's just weird.
I don't know if anybody else has ever had a trouble with it zoomed way in. Like my camera's usually not quite this close. I stand right here all the time. And apparently I need to scoot over and it's all distorted. I mean, maybe I'll be right back.
We can see you fine for what it matters.
Like that actually looks fine in the screen, or you can see half my face right now.
No, completely normal.
Yeah. You look like you're a pilot with your headset on.
Thank you. That is super interesting.
That's not what you're seeing of yourself?
No, I was just gonna say, I wonder if I can do a screenshot, and I couldn't raise my hand last week. What is wrong with me these days?
All I know is I'm so thankful to have Nancy behind the scenes running the Zoom account because I would totally fail. I know I would.
I guess if that's the good.
I don't believe that. I believe everyone is here but Kate Townley, so you're free to start if you'd like.
All right, let's go ahead and start.
All right.
I'd like to call the meeting of the March, if you can believe it. Second, Planning and Zoning Commission. Nancy, can you call the roll, please?
Sure. Mr. Adams?
Here.
Mr. Atkins?
Here.
Ms. Lepowski?
Here.
Thank you. Ms. Fuller?
Here.
Ms. Brown? Mr. Haggerty?
Here.
Ms. Donaldson?
Here.
I do not see, she has. Ms. Townley?
Oh, there she is.
Here.
Fantastic. So we obviously have a quorum. The first order of business is to approve the minutes of the February 17th, 2021 Planning and Zoning Committee. Is there a motion to approve?
Make a motion to approve.
Second.
I will second. Nope.
Any discussion? Seeing none. Nancy, can you call for the vote?
Sure. Ms. Townley,
Yes.
Ms. Donaldson,
Yes.
Mr. Haggerty,
Yes.
Ms. Brown,
Did that not work? Yes.
thank you. Ms. Fuller,
Yes.
Ms. Lepowski,
Abstain. Sorry, I'm having trouble here.
you're okay. Mr. Atkins,
Yes.
Mr. Adams,
Abstain.
and Chair Austin.
Yes.
Motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you all. I don't see anybody from the public on here. Am I correct in that, Nancy?
That is correct.
Okay, so we can skip the public forum and move on to, I believe, Wade, you're the one that's going to be presenting now? Or I'm sorry, John?
No, yes, I believe it's John.
Good evening, Planning and Zoning Commission members. Dan and I have agreed prior to the meeting to start him out on this without the PowerPoint. And so he's going to kind of do his Johnny Carson monologue to kind of set you up for the PowerPoint in about 10, 15 minutes. Take it away, Dan.
Thank you, John. Hello, Commissioners.
Do you have a little turban and stuff like Johnny Carson used to have, and we ask you questions and you give us the answer or something, whatever that was?
I sure wish I did, but I don't, unfortunately.
Okay.
I remember all those bits. Yeah, that's a good word. I get to do a bit of a monologue here, and the purpose, I think, is to try and take us back to the context that we started with in October of last year when we started this series of meetings. And hopefully, if I can lay this out for you, it should make some of your subsequent deliberations this evening a bit easier and kind of put them in an overall context. You may remember when we started in October of 2020, we had a session. It was actually on October 20th. And that had followed a study session that we had with City Council just the week before. And that was a really pivotal session in which we talked to them about the framework agreement that we were advising with L&R Partners, which is the special servicing firm that represents the bondholders that foreclosed on the Weingarten property, and how the framework agreement would interact with our master development agreement being pursued by the firm of SKB. So we really started with a macro context, and we talked about these two key firms that we're continuing to deal with and two agreements that are currently in process with each of them. With SKB, it is an amendment to the preliminary development agreement, which would extend that agreement due to the impacts of COVID until late this year or early next year. And with L&R, again, it's the framework agreement that we are finalizing, and both of these agreements should be up before City Council in late March or early April. And of course, both agreements really contemplate the rezoning of city center to facilitate the necessary redevelopment of city center and make it work. And in both cases, what we're really trying to do, the key goal of our agreements with both entities, as supported by the redevelopment, is to make the vertical redevelopment opportunities as attractive as they can be to the development community in terms of what they're looking at, in terms of other TOD, transit-oriented development opportunities locally, as well as what many of them are looking at nationally. So we collectively, the city and the city council and hopefully planning and zoning, all need to collaborate in this effort of really how do we make this, how do we facilitate redevelopment by the various vertical developers who are going to be delivering projects probably over the next 10 to 20 years here. And we need to make it comparable to what they're seeing, both in terms of the related zoning and entitlements, but also the process that they're looking at as they're stepping into an evaluation of acquiring these properties. So we need to make sure that we're not burdening the properties with zoning related requirements or processes that are unlike what they're seeing at peer cities. Because if we do that, and I'll give you a couple examples and John can give you examples as they pertain to cost. If we do that, we'll be handicapping our efforts and we won't achieve anything near the redevelopment potential that we want collectively or that we need for our city. So one example of that is, and we've talked about it a lot in recent meetings. I would say John has done an outstanding job presenting you guys with the individual menus of what a redevelopment rezoning looks like, and really fostering a lot of discussion, taking that discussion back and putting it into a format that hopefully we can all process, discuss, and move forward with. But one of the things we've talked a lot about is the parking requirements in the city center area. And John can give you more details, but what I want to do is remind us collectively that we have a huge pool of surplus parking. We have over 900 parking spaces that the city is currently obligated to provide to RTD as shared parking. And RTD only gets to use those spaces not on an exclusive basis. And they really only have rights to those spaces during the business day and during business hours. So that means that all those spaces are available for other uses during evenings and weekends. And as a practical matter, a significant number of them are available for shared use during daytime business hours. So the availability of those spaces is one of the things that really goes into what can we do in terms of parking requirements under the new zoning to make redevelopment as economically feasible as it can be. Because with that number of spaces available, really our parking requirements in the city center rezoning ought to be absolutely minimal, because particularly for hotel and for residential projects, they will be able to access those spaces at all the times that their customers and peak employment loads need those spaces. So we just absolutely should not burden our rezoning with parking requirements that are at all tied to the city's normal requirements. They should really be much, much lower, taking into account the burden of the parking that the city stepped into 20 years ago. And even though we're anticipating some renegotiation of that parking amount and where those parking fields can be moved around to, it's still going to be a very, very large parking pool. We probably estimate it'll be in excess of 600 spaces, even at the end of the day. So that's that's a really good, relevant example of how we set the table for redevelopment. And I've also mentioned at various times along the way, you know, you've had a lot of discussion, really good discussion about the goals for city center redevelopment and the visions and how it functions and the people place aspects of it. And I've mentioned, and I think this is particularly relevant, that there will be layers of contractual agreements with both SKB, LNR, and each of the parties that they intend to sell properties to that protect those types of goals, those visions. And so again, the master development agreement with SKB, the framework agreement with LNR, and then under both agreements, there will be a series of development covenants or obligations with each of the buyers of those properties. And in each case, it's anticipated that the city staff, you know, with input from planning and zoning and city council, can specify a lot of detail about the goals for redevelopment. So I think there should be a lot of assurance and protection to the commission that things that you've discussed will be addressed in these additional agreements, and they don't need to burden, again, the rezoning per se, because if they do, again, we won't get the looks that we need from the redevelopers that we want to attract. So again, I would just ask that you keep this macro context in mind, because I think it's really relevant to our overall goal. And if we get too carried away with the detail and kind of the restrictive nature that we would tend to typically take for a rezoning in a non-TOD environment, then we will not have been successful in what we're trying to do here. And with that, I will turn it back to John, and happy to answer any questions later or support his more detailed presentation. Thank you.
It looks like Judy has a question.
I was going to say Judy has a question.
Well, I have two. One is, I know we keep you keep referring to this RTD parking, but availability is one thing, but location is another. And if we're talking about the parking lot on the north side of the light rail station, that, you know, just because there's parking spaces doesn't mean anybody's going to use them. They want to be closer. And this goes back to our conversation about they're just going to park on the street and they're just going to park in other parking places. So yes, I agree. We don't want more parking than is necessary, but if it's not located in the right spot, I don't see how it matters. So explain to me how their location is going to be improved. And then my other question is I'd like some examples of where else in the metro area any developer has access to a property as valuable as what we have. And I don't know that we shouldn't at least have some power in saying what is valuable to Englewood instead of always, I don't know, begging to be liked, demand that we only have the highest and best. And I know you've spent months, and I'm not discounting all the work that you did, but we have been talking about this too since October. And I just feel frustrated that we have talked about, one, I'm sick and tired of talking about parking, but we have talked about this and we came to agreements, and then suddenly it all gets thrown up in the air and we're right back to where we were in October. So there's my frustration. So my two questions: one, explain to me how the location is going to be improved, because I don't care how many spots there are. If they're not in the right place, they're meaningless. And two, explain to me why we have to forego all of our desires for zoning specifics because of something that we still don't know what people are going to want. So I'm just a little frustrated. I feel like we're back to square one.
Well, I would probably beg your indulgence and suggest that you shouldn't be frustrated, but let me try to answer your questions. As far as the parking location, very good location. I mean, and very good question. 305 of the 910 parking spaces that are obligated to be provided to RTD are on the Civic Center site today. Those are shared with city employee parking and other customers of City Center. So 1/3 basically of the total parking is already in place at Civic Center. With the redevelopment, it's generally anticipated that that parking garage will be replaced with a new shared use parking garage that likely will be larger and will accommodate even more parking, potentially not only for RTD, but for the other uses. One of the other sources,
One
yes.
quick thing, we saw one picture where that's where the hotel was going to go.
Well, the hotel would potentially go on the Civic Center site. The parking garage could both go on Civic Center. It could go also on the adjacent property that SKB is negotiating to acquire from LNR. So between those two blocks, which are known as Block B, Civic Center, and the adjacent property where Office Depot is located, there's plenty of room for additional structured parking. And it's generally anticipated that it will be more than the structured parking that's there today, which is basically quite aged and falling apart and needs to be replaced under almost any circumstance. So if we, the developer, whatever the combination is, are going to be building a parking garage, it's very likely going to be more than 2 levels, which it is today. So at the end of the day, there will be a minimum of 300 parking spaces available at that location, and very likely much more than that. The other factor we're dealing with is we have what's known as a master ECR agreement with Walmart. Walmart was very concerned about their parking 20 years ago. And the reality is they have surplus parking today. And the way that agreement will be structured is some of that surplus parking will very likely be available to support the overall redevelopment of City Center. So between kind of the rearrangement of the RTD parking and the increased availability of the Walmart parking, I think there's a very, very high level of assurance that parking, again, on top of still some minimal levels of parking that are quite healthy relative to our peer cities, will be available. Then just also wanted to mention we talked about what other TOD development is happening around the area. The reason we don't see as much redevelopment happening because we have a difficult situation. And frankly, some of our zoning and entitlement regulations are not as favorable to TOD location as what's now occurred throughout the metro area. Most of the development in the metro area is in fact occurring at TOD locations, and we're actually fighting a little bit to catch up. So one of the things we're just really trying to take advantage of is the attributes that we do have to work with. And one of the biggest ones is this huge pool of surplus parking.
Michelle, I'm sorry, Michelle.
No, that's okay. I can't. That's fine. You have identified 305 parking spaces on the Civic Center site. Where are the other 600? Are they over there on the north side?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So that whole parking area over there is going to be included in the redevelopment of City Center?
Correct. It's in the rezoning, and it's in the anticipated redevelopment. And it's, although that may be likely a later phase of redevelopment, it's definitely in the overall package. And it would more than likely be a combination of very heavy residential redevelopment on top of structured parking.
Okay, Judy, did your question about other developments, was that answered well enough by Dan? Okay.
Colin?
Thank you, and I appreciate where you're coming from, Judy. Location is, as you know, is the most important part of all of this, but I do also go back to what we were looking at. That the redevelopment might happen, but it might not be what we want it to be if we aren't as aggressive as we can be within reason. I mean, I'm not want to giving up anything here, but you know, when we talk about the Sports Authority Park area to the south that became a storage area, it got redeveloped, but wasn't maybe in the exact way that we wanted it to be redeveloped. And I think just as some of the supplemental information that's been provided, some of the studies that we've been reading, and the way things are transitioning, that reduction in parking is a very real consideration. And I think it's just something that we want to make sure that we're embracing as much as possible on that side of it. So I agree with what you're saying of, you know, it doesn't matter where it is, but I do want to make sure that we're being as aggressive to make this the best possible project that we can.
And I think John will give you the specifics that will give you some assurance. We're not talking about eliminating parking. We're just talking about being conscious of, you know, explicit about the fact that we have this big pool. It already burdens to a great degree what the city can do redevelopment wise. And we shouldn't double down on our burden. We should take advantage of it. And with that, John, I'll let you get into the overall package, because I think that's the relevant part here. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you, Dan.
All right, I will attempt to share screen. Does everyone see the screen, my PowerPoint?
Yep, I can.
Right, thank you. See. All right, so today we have conducted 5 study sessions on the city center rezoning project, and we have gathered consensus we think, under the MU1B1 zoning parameters that were flagged in the Triber report. We think we've got a good handle on minimum and maximum residential density. And we think we've also covered building height wells as well. But we have had some disagreements, I think, in terms of the multi-unit residential parking, commercial parking. And so that's kind of what we're going to focus on a little bit more tonight. So when we did hear some of those different voices and disagreements about being too aggressive with our recommended multi-unit residential parking standards. And I wrestled with this for a number of weeks and thought about how could I bring everyone together to get them to a place that would be workable for this redevelopment and that people could get behind. And in the end, after a lot of wrestling with this, we kind of figured out, Dan and I, that we just can't advise going away from what we proposed last time. It just won't work for this small site. We need to densify the site. We need to be competitive with our other station areas in the metro. Otherwise, we're just going to get passed over. And like Dan said, we kind of already have sort of like a built-in, you know, parking and shared parking situation with RTD. And there's a lot of things going on with RTD right now where they're very amenable to looking at that in different ways. And so tonight we're still sticking with the staff's recommendation for the half-mile radius of 1 parking space per unit for market rate apartments, a 0.75 space per unit for income restricted, and then the quarter mile going down to a 0.75 space per unit market rate and a 0.5 space per unit income restricted. Now that doesn't mean that that's what they're going to park it to. That's just kind of the benchmarks that we'd like to use. And we'll see how they come in, and we'll use those as negotiation points with the developers. Now, in terms of the commercial parking, we did kind of come up with a different way of looking at this. We think this is a less certain thing it's easier to predict, or the housing parking, what we need for that, but this is a little bit harder to predict. And there was some discomfort with doing that, with pegging in and choosing parking ratios for those things in terms of hotels, restaurants, and office. So we decided to maybe potentially recast that in a different way. And instead of actually developing or identifying exact parking ratios, we thought we would go to more of a guideline, a negotiating guideline system, where we'd have parking reduction goals that would be negotiated. And so the goal for the half-mile radius, we are proposing a 0 to 25% reduction from our typical suburban parking standards. And in the quarter-mile radius, our goal would be a 25 to 50% reduction. So what are we looking for tonight? Well, we think we've done quite a bit of study sessions on this topic, and we think that maybe there's a potential for a decision tonight. The decision would be, we're thinking, if you're ready, we'd like to conclude the study session series on city center rezoning. And what that would mean was that we would proceed with holding a community meeting. And then we would also start working on developing a formal recommended ordinances for the MUB1 text amendments and the rezoning of city center from PUD to MUB1. And we would then begin initiating the ordinance approval process, including the Planning and Zoning Commission public hearings and findings of fact. Our preferred city center rezoning strategy, a recap, basically, we're looking first to do some text amendments to the MUB1 base zone district. Then we would do a base rezoning of the entire city center PUD to MUB1, and that would include Walmart and the Art Walk apartments, even though they won't be redeveloped anytime soon. And then, of course, the third thing would be the transit station area overlay, which would be used for the final site plan review. The criteria in that TSA overlay that we are developing through this series will be used by staff to do the site plan review. Text amendments and base rezoning will be processed as separate cases scheduled in a concurrent fashion back to back on the same night. The MUB1 text amendments would establish critical vested rights for the SKB and LNR developments, including land uses, densities, parking, and building heights. Now I'd like to just give you a quick summary of what we've kind of run through the last few meetings. This is from the Triber report. These are the topics that we tackled. Land use hotel, we decided to add hotel use to the MUB1 zone district as a use by right. For parking structure principal use, we decided no change to the MUB1 is necessary at this time, and we'd regulate through the city center special district plan overlay. Land use, commercial ground floor requirement, we ended up deciding on limiting the commercial ground floor to the 3,300, 3,400, and 3,500 blocks of Broadway only. For bicycle parking, we are recommending no change to the current requirement of 1 space per 2 residential units. And same with commercial, no change to the current requirement of 1 bicycle parking space per 10 vehicle spaces. Multi-unit residential density, we are using the stationary master plan recommendations of 125 units for a maximum density and a minimum density of 75 units per acre. Multi-unit residential parking, we're looking at standards of 1 space per unit and income restricted for projects of 0.75 spaces per unit in the half mile, and then going down the quarter mile, that would drop by 0.25 for each of those. Commercial parking, we are now recommending establishing guidelines to be used as benchmarks rather than targeted parking ratios. And building height, we believe that we should establish a building height standard of 125 feet within the light rail station influence area, with the ability to negotiate upwards in the quarter mile. The Inglewood Light Rail Corridor Plan, of course, it calls out the following recommended housing development targets for the Inglewood Station neighborhood area. It calls for a target of 2,950 units in addition to the Art Walk apartments, a minimum density of 75 units per acre, maximum density of 125 units per acre, and it called out a parking ratio of 1.0 spaces per unit. Then we, of course, we've recently discovered this report from RTD that they did last year during the pandemic and completed here in December of 2020, the residential parking and stationary study. Staff believes the RTD stationary residential parking study offers a very strong evidence that residential parking is significantly underutilized at near light rail stations. The utilization counts were conducted at 104 properties within 10-minute walk of the stations in April of 2020 during the stay-at-home order, Tuesday through Thursday, 10 to 3. Market rate, they've discovered that 40% of the provided parking is not utilized. In the market rate developments they studied, an average of 1.23 spaces were provided, but they found only a utilization rate of 0.74 spaces. And with income restricted, 50% of that provided parking was not utilized. Typically, the average was 0.72 spaces provided with only 0.36 spaces utilized. And then they followed this up during the nighttime in September to do some verification at 19 of those properties. And the results were significantly identical to the April results.
Whoops, John, if I could interrupt, Kate Townley has a question.
Okay, go ahead, Kate.
Oh, thanks. Sorry, I wasn't sure when to ask it. I was just trying to see if you can help me understand, since this is like one large master planned area, and do you anticipate like whole blocks getting developed at once? And I'm just wondering that because I feel like it's going to be very different if single uses come in and it's a portion of an area, they need 25 parking spaces, so they create their own parking lot with their own curb cuts, and then the next person comes in and does that. Or is it more in a district, that shared district kind of format where you're sort of feeding in somehow to a minimum parking? Because I think that will really make a difference on how the area is shaped. I don't know if you have a sense of that.
I think Dan is the one probably to answer that.
Good question. And part of the answer is we don't know, but because of the fact that we have these two larger properties, the city property, which is under the control of SKB, and the former Weingarten property under the control of L&R, we definitely have a potential where properties will be transferred to subsequent developers who would have the potential to be doing more than one property at a time and approach the parking discussions with the city staff on more of a district basis. Because we also have this pool parking, shared parking with RTD, I think one of the things that staff envisions is that every time parking comes up, there'll be a discussion about a possible agreement between the developer and the city that pertains to a certain amount of those RTD shared spaces being allocated to that project or projects. So even that forces more of a district type mentality and discipline onto the discussion of parking rather than pure individual standalone parcels and projects. So at the end of the day, probably the best answer, Kate, is that it'll be some kind of hybrid, but that the hybrid nature of it will be helpful in terms of making sure that the parking allocation is as efficient as it can be, and that it's, there are multiple opportunities to think about how parking is working or not working as the project evolves.
Okay, that's helpful. I just go to some places where they may have the same amount of parking in one place as in another place, and just the either the way that the different developments went in, or the time, and the fact that you can't get from one parking lot to the other in that kind of flow, it really makes a difference on how many spaces you could have overall anyway. So I was just curious about that. And I guess the other thing, and John, this may be more for you, is just maybe we could think about too, if that's enough bicycle parking, if we're trying to encourage more people, and if there is going to be a reduction in commercial parking, or if it's possible for the developer to put so much in, or then the city to have some additional bicycle corrals, or also areas for micromobility parking.
Yeah, I think that's pretty reasonable, actually. Triba flagged that, but then they kind of walked it back after I had talked to some people on the current planning side here in Inglewood that they weren't having any pushback from anybody on that. And so right now it's like I think a 1 space per 2 units. And I could easily see us just saying it's one bicycle space per unit. And the reason we could do that is because bicycles really don't take up a lot of space. And so I think that's probably doable. So we'll think about that.
John, I have a question about the RTD study. I did read through it, and I believe that they did not count the street parking. They were only counting the cars on the development sites. Is that correct?
I would assume so. I didn't see anything that said anything about street parking in the study. I
just
believe it's on-site parking.
Yeah, I think back to Oxford Station, which of course there's basically no parking. And so everything is street parking. So
well, I'd like to correct that. So actually Oxford Station, they do provide 1 space per unit there. There are a certain number of people, about maybe 10 or so people, who do like to park on the street. I'm not sure if it's because they find it closer to the door, or if there's, I'm not sure, or maybe they don't want to pay. I don't know which it is, but there are some people who choose to park there on the street, but that development is parked at 1 space per unit.
Okay. Yeah, I really appreciate you guys taking what we've talked about and trying to come up with some solutions to all of these discussions. I just want to make sure we're clear that it may be part of the reason why those transit-oriented developments are underparked is because the developer is charging for parking. Of course, the other thing, of course, is RTD making people pay for parking. So I just want to be clear on that. There's numbers. The numbers might not be totally accurate, but anyway.
Yeah, I can't help but contribute this fact that we, the city, hired a Walker Parking to do an independent study last year, and it was during peak season, and their numbers were even lower. I mean, here at City Center, they actually went out and looked at all of the spaces throughout the entire center, the Walmart spaces, the city spaces, the RTD spaces, and found out utilization rates. In some cases, on some peak days, we're actually running below 60%. So that would indicate that the overall trending is generally in that direction, a downward utilization of parking spaces. And we see that clearly on the private sector side, where office developers are begging cities to let them reduce parking just because it's going completely unused.
No, I agree. I actually came out and counted the parking spaces, I think yesterday. But there's a very important part that is contributing to that, and that is that RTD has gotten rid of the C line from Englewood Station to Union Station. So anybody who wants to go downtown has to take a really crazy trip. And I actually I didn't take the trip, but I did go investigate it. And them getting rid of that C line directly down to Union Station, there's a whole lot of, if you want to get downtown, you might as well just drive to another station rather than come to Englewood.
There are no other hands, John, if you want to continue.
Okay. All right, so this slide here, I have aerial photos of the Art Walk apartments over the course of 4 different time periods, 2006, 2010, 2014, 2018. And what I'm trying to point out here is that when you're looking at the parking areas, and I would point you out to the middle of the area of the big square, and then the area to the north behind it, and then also to the parking garage on the west side. When you look at that, you see a lot of empty spaces in the middle of the big square. You see a lot of empty spaces behind on the north side. And then at that parking garage, over time, basically nobody is parking on that top level. And so these are opportunities actually that we think this development has too much parking, doesn't need it. And we believe that we have an opportunity to tap into some of this unused parking. And so we would like to start talking to the Art Walk apartment people to see if we can lease some of those areas and convert that to some different things that maybe portions of the RTD parking would be taken care of in that way. Or it could be shared parking with some of the new residential developments that we are envisioning. So we think that's a really good opportunity there to take something that was over-provided in the first place and make it more efficient. And going along with that, there's other opportunities as well. So we believe that, we've got to the north, that whole 610 spaces up there, which is just dying to be reconfigured in some way. In the past, we have allowed additional RTD parking to occur at the Cushing Park site, and it hasn't been a problem with the park, people wanting to use a park. It hasn't really filled up, but it has served as some extra overflow capacity. Then to the south of the retail along Englewood Parkway, that's kind of where we envision a parking structure to happen. And then going further east there to the Walmart over there, that the area to the south of Englewood Parkway is never typically utilized except for maybe during the Christmas season. And we think we could probably negotiate with Walmart to use some of that for overflow parking for RTD as well, in a seasonal way. And then even farther east, there's that kind of extra parking there to the north of the Englewood Parkway that is also grossly underutilized. And we could probably negotiate with those folks for additional overflow RTD parking on a seasonal basis. Some of the strategies we expect to be employed at City Center to help with the parking situation is we're really planning on expanding the shuttle bus service using the DDA. We would add nights and weekend service, and as well as probably seriously upgrading the experience for the riders, buying state-of-the-art shuttle buses that would be much more inviting and comfortable to ride in. We think that would be much more attractive to people. And we can do that with the DDA once that gets going. We'd also like to, at some point, solicit a bike share company to come to Inglewood, like they have in Denver, to serve the Inglewood Central Business Districts. And we have actually heard from some bicycle sharing companies about that. So we think that's not out of the realm of possibility. We'd like to potentially convert some of the free parking to reserved paid parking. There's probably a market there for some RTD users who would be willing to pay to guarantee a spot at the station. We'd also might look into creating an Eco Pass neighborhood where Eco Passes are provided for all of the residents in the area for free or for some reduced amount of money that comes out of the budgets of the apartment builders and developments themselves. And then again, the shared utilization of some of the RTD park and ride spaces with other uses that have compatible parking patterns, and utilization of the unused or underused existing private parking spaces through parking agreements. Okay, so this is our two-tier station area map, and I must point out to you that Dan, part of my frustration with Dan was this a little bit. Dan asked me, he had this idea that the portion of the LNR property that's between South Galapago and South Elati Street has a high potential in the near future to be redeveloped, and he would like to apply those quarter-mile radius parking ratios over there as well. And his idea was just to put in that block only and add that to the quarter-mile, leaving the Walmart out of it. However, I felt strongly that made a kind of an odd boundary that didn't really respect the quarter-mile, really. And so I said, let's put in the Walmart and let's just move it to Elati, and we would that would be our quarter-mile area. And then subsequently, I also decided we should probably move the half-mile then out another block farther. And so we've moved that out to include the Live Apartments, the Wells Fargo Bank Building, as well as the Inglewood Marketplace Shopping Center, but not extending it to the Broadway corridor. Any thoughts on that?
I'm not seeing any hands, John.
Does silence mean that you're good with it?
I have a question.
Okay.
I got a couple of questions, actually. That picture right there shows where the parking structure would be at the Office Depot. It looks like it's actually pretty well occupied. So I don't know where those cars are going to the shopping center or what, but when you put a parking structure in there, you're gonna be using that for RTD and the apartments, I believe. Is that correct?
That's very likely.
So the distance will be about 3 or 4 times what it is currently to get to that parking structure from the light rail station. It'll be a lot further walk. I mean, it'll be doable, but there'll be like an 8-minute walk probably.
John, can you point out where we think the additional structured parking might be on Block C?
Do you see my little cursor?
Right. See all cars down there?
Yes, that's true. There are some cars, but we think that they could be handled through the parking structure.
So the parking structure would basically be just a free-for-all. RTD, apartments, shopping, whatever, anybody that wants to park in there can park in there. And you're talking $35,000 a spot for a parking structure?
That's
That's
what
a
they
lot.
cost.
That's 10 to $15 million for a parking structure that's going to be a free-for-all, basically.
It not necessarily will it be a free-for-all, because there may be areas that are reserved for different things. A certain floor might be reserved for the commercial retail businesses on Inglewood Parkway, whereas the upper floors, some of those might be reserved or shared with the RTD as well. But it's not they're not necessarily all going to be shared. There may be some reserved for certain uses at certain times.
Yeah, and I'd just like to add, Carl, that, you know, technology in parking garages has come a long way, where basically there are computerized systems and tracking that allows parking to be allocated to different spaces of the garage. This parking, the different users would very likely be arriving and leaving at different times of the day. And one of the big things we all have to keep in mind, contrary to the date on which this picture was taken, you can see the Civic Center parking is fairly full. That top lot now is essentially empty. Most transit agencies know that long-term parking at light rail stations may never, ever, ever, ever come back to be anything close to what it is. And so it's very likely that, you know, we're looking at reductions of the long-term use of that space that could easily be 25 to 50% of the prior capacity prior to COVID. So that needs to be taken into consideration on top of everything else we've already mentioned.
So you began the monologue by saying that we have an overabundance of parking, but yet you're talking about taking the Cushing Park parking lot for a city park parking lot, and then making a deal with the Art Walk apartments on using some of their parking. And then also working a deal with Walmart to get some of their parking. So do we have a lot of parking, or, I mean, a lot of that parking will be demolished when all the development starts. And a thing that Kate brought up, that as things are rebuilt, is it going to be a piecemeal, or it's just a massive configuration of confusion, or is it going to be a system that is walkable and bicyclable, and that is an issue that could be a real issue there for me anyway. You start building all this stuff piecemeal, you know, an apartment building over here, a parking structure over here, a hotel over here. That stuff needs to all be coordinated to, when it's all done, that it works.
Well, and of course, that's what your city staff is here for, to do that. And our agreements with our two players contemplate that kind of overall redevelopment coordination. We're very, very fortunate in that, you know, we have the opportunity through the city's continued ownership interest to actually contemplate what we're talking about here. And the fact that this ground lease on the former Weingarten property is coming back potentially to the city and can be terminated and transferred to the private sector. And then the EAF continued to hold as much property as it did. I mean, those are two very beneficial circumstances that are just essentially for the grace of God that we can now take advantage of and are attempting to do so. But to answer your first question, we have a massive oversupply of parking. Not only the RTD shared parking, but all of the other sites that John pointed out, and I think one of the things we're trying to ensure is that that oversupply of parking is utilized first by the developers and is not a cost to the city, that the city actually benefits by the oversupply that currently exists.
Michelle?
I would agree that currently we do have a massive oversupply of parking, and I think all, if not most of the commission wants to give the city the flexibility to, redevelop this. But since we've already talked about making a agreement with Walmart and things like that, I don't see any real reason to extend the half and quarter mile boundaries out at this point in time. That's just my opinion. I go along with Judy, as the parking needs to be where it needs to be. Always in real estate, it's location, location, location.
Well, let me just give you the rationale for these adjustments. Whenever you draw curvilinear radii from a station, in this case, you end up with these circular lines transecting individual parcels. That creates just huge headaches over time, because any development project then is trying to allocate, the zoning and other entitlements between what's on one portion and what's on the other. So that whatever we want to do, we want to square the parcels off and make them function that way. And then the second part of that, there's really two parts in terms of taking it out to a laddie. And that is, one, Walmart will very likely not be redeveloped any time in our lifetime. And secondly, we can add big, big value to the redevelopment of City Center by including what is Block D, which is where Ross and Petco are currently located. We had the good fortune of having L&R extend both of those leases out 10 years. And so if we can put a redevelopment-oriented rezoning on that property, we can attract a redevelopment type buyer rather than a passive status quo buyer. And that will be a big, big, big value generator for the city. So that would be the rationale for making those adjustments.
Okay, I'm willing to keep listening.
Diane?
Oh man, thank you. Sorry, I'm having so many difficulties getting my cursor to move. I have a few thoughts. One is, Carl, with regard to your comment about the $35,000 of space, that definitely is expensive. And I think, but it's very accurate. It's a very standard fee to imagine for structured parking. I think that actually just speaks to the need to reduce the requirement, because you can imagine developers who want to put the money into nice building materials, or more units, more affordable units, different ways that they could parse their money. I think John's slide showed for 375 units, that would yield a $6 million savings to the developer, which we could hopefully at least partially invest in the actual development itself. And then to a little bit of a different point, in Englewood Forward, I just did a quick search. There are 164 instances of the word walk, 108 instances of the word move, 125 instances of the word bike, and 13 instances of the word parking. In section 5.1, Englewood Forward recommends developing a strategic planning framework for reimagining, among other things, parking requirements. And I think that the city staff has done a terrific job of showing us all of the ways that we need to reduce the parking, how we can do it strategically, how we can partner and share with other spaces across the city, and how we have way too much as it is And if we want to really invest in Englewood forward and really follow through on the mission that that is suggesting, we really need to reduce the parking requirement. We're going to be competing against communities that are already, right now, I know of several in, say, Aurora and other adjacent communities who are trying to do even denser, more sustainable, interesting developments. And if we want to keep up and keep Englewood as a player in the metro region, we need to step up and, you know, sort of do some of what these things that the city staff is suggesting. I think more parking reduces your open space, it reduces your walkability. And I think we really need to think about developing safe, walkable communities rather than sort of doing more overabundant parking. That's my spiel.
Noel?
I appreciated the reduction goals for the commercial and how that allows for more negotiation as opposed to a rigid framework. Has something like that been considered for the multi-unit residential?
So we believe that we really need to hammer that down a little bit more with the residential. We think that it's much more easy to predict of what we will need based on what the needs of the residents, the studies that are out there. And we also feel that we need to be able to give specific numbers to developers to get them, especially for that L&R property, to when they want to market it, they need to be able to say that to them to in the marketing that that's what the parking rate is set to, because it's going to be very critical in when the prospective developers try to develop a pro forma and to see if it pencils out. And so we believe that we really need to have set residential numbers up front. But we might have a little bit, we have added some language about the potential for doing some further negotiating and to be flexible. So they're kind of almost more like guidelines at this point now too. And so I think we feel pretty comfortable with what we've got residentially. The commercial thing, though, I think makes more sense to go via these percentages, because it's less, we are less confident about what those numbers should look like or may look like. And so that's kind of where we're at. Is there anything, Dan, you'd like to add to that?
No, that was good. Thanks, John.
Okay.
And I would like to say that for, we're looking at the 1/4 mile and a half mile, which I think we should maybe rename, as they don't seem to be fitting quite as well. But my preference would be to apply the yellow rules to both the yellow and the pink area. I think that's all, great candidate for, high density, high height. You mentioned that the half-mile area would not allow negotiation for higher than 125 feet. I think it would be great to at least have that option available in the pink area.
Kate?
I wanted to, first of all, second everything Diane said so nicely. And then also, Noah, I love that idea of kind of shifting all of this to yellow. I think that would be, I think it's appropriate for this area, and more so than any other part of Englewood. So it makes sense to me. And I would say, even for the question in front of us in terms of like whether we should move the yellow out, at least, I mean, it's still, in my Google map estimate here, it's an 8-minute walk from that corner of Elati and Englewood Parkway all the way to the train station, to where you get onto the train. So it's definitely within that whole 10-minute walk area, which is, I think, is why we use these radii anyway. But I would also be open to considering that whole area as yellow, like Noel mentioned.
Kate Fuller.
Just to build on Kate and Noel, I like that idea too, but looking at it, I think maybe the more natural yellow space would end at Cherokee because that's where that major light at Hamden is. I don't know, that's just kind of a suggestion if we wanted to compromise and bring that red back, because once you get past Bannock, it is a little bit further out, but that Cherokee area is really walkable to light rail area and everything.
Now I'm confused. I thought we were moving the yellow area out to Elati, and from Elati east would be pink. Am I mistaken now?
I think Kate and Noel were proposing that all of this becomes yellow that looks pink and yellow.
I would be totally against that. I'm sorry. I'm 65 years old with AFib, and that's a big, big jump for me. But, you know, I'm only one vote here.
And my compromise was to cut it off at Cherokee.
Yeah, anyway, I'm not in favor of that. I would leave it the way that John has drawn it.
Kate Townley.
I was just going to mention, I understand that whole breaking point at Cherokee, but I think just in terms of looking at the whole development area, I think it would be a little bit funky to have that one section of it different. I think it'd be better to either have a whole chunk different or have it all the same. And hopefully within this master plan or development, there will be more of a trail or a better connection going from that little dry creek where it ends to the station as well. And I think one of the things is that in looking at this, I don't think there is an expectation for everyone to walk from Acoma to the light rail station. But I think it's more so a matter of parking with it. And most likely, I mean, just like you said, you're not going to park on one end and walk to the other end.
No.
So ideally then I would say the people that are choosing to go there and not parking, there'll be spaces for people who choose to go there and park. So Michelle, I don't think that there's a request to ask people to walk from one end to the other. It's more so making it more walkable by reducing the amount of parking that goes in there. So it doesn't feel like that big open space that it is right now.
Okay.
And Kate, to add to that, you're totally right, because Wells Fargo's on the east side of Cherokee. So it would be kind of awkward.
John, would you like to proceed? If we can belabor these points, we're never going to get through what you want to do tonight. So.
Well, thank you for those comments. We will take those under advisement, and we probably will come back for a short thing on that, what we've come up with, or a new proposal based on that, or maybe we just stay the same, or maybe we just give you different alternatives and you guys can vote. But I will then move on. So we have proposed, we thought this made a lot of sense to have a two-tier stationary set of standards and guidelines, but maybe we end up going with one. But at this point, when I was making this presentation, we had defined a 1/4 mile and a 1/2 mile radii distances from the station platform. We would allow for greater intensity closest to the station within the 1/4 mile radius. Our proposed density that we're looking at is 125 units per acre and a minimum of 75 units per acre. Building height standards of 125 feet seem to be generally acceptable. However, we did have differences with the parking. Staff concludes that deviating from the proposed multi-unit residential parking standards is not advisable, but we did recast the proposed commercial parking standards as an aspirational parking guidelines to be negotiated. In terms of the residential density, staff continues to recommend a TOD residential parking standard as part of the MUB1 zoning regulations. Setting a TOD residential park standard will create a high level of certainty for prospective developers, enabling an accurate pricing assessment and offer. City staff, SKB, and L&R partners have generally agreed to a 350 plus or minus multi-unit residential project on the south half of the Office Depot block. And at a proposed density of 125 units per acre, the 3-acre site would yield 375 units. To achieve that number, we believe a parking ratio of 1 space per unit will facilitate that possibility of achieving that kind of a density. And that we believe a higher parking ratio than that would make it extremely unlikely for that density to be achieved. And as you have gone through your slides well, you've kind of seen our cost breakdown of what that might look like if you had 375 units parked at 1 space per unit times 35,000 is $13 million. And if you had to provide 1.5 spaces and they're structured, that would be 563 spaces times 35,000 would be $19 million. And so that's a significant extra expense, 6.6 million, that would have to be provided to structured parking at the expense of the quality of the development. And we have to compete with other areas, especially Denver. Denver and Aurora have a lot of different of these TOD sites, and they've got a lot lower requirements than 1.5 space per unit. And we believe that developers will be more interested in them if we have these, if we stick with the 1.5 spaces per unit. So in order for the recommended redevelopment approach agreement to move forward, we believe a competitive and cost-effective parking standard must be approved as part of the base rezoning. And
sorry, I'm sorry, John, I couldn't get off mute. Colin has a question.
Okay.
Just a real quick question, a reminder, on the commercial side, that's like a 1 space per 10,000 square feet or something like that. Did you mention that again today, of then what that reduction or goal would be, or how that impacts this? Because are we looking at just all residential? Are we not going to have any commercial requirements on this part of the development?
Yes, I just haven't got to it yet.
Oh, okay, never mind. I apologize.
Okay. All right. So here's 2 examples of different developments that we have in Inglewood. Bell Cherry Hills is parked at 1.5 spaces per unit, and it has a residential density of about 72 units per acre, which is at our low point, our minimum residential density that we are proposing. And then the Live Apartments, they provide first floor parking at 1 space per unit, and that computes to a residential density of 127 units per acre. And so what that shows is the difference in the fact that if you have a 1.5 space versus a 1.0 space per unit, you can see the difference there in the density that you can achieve. All right, so our recommended multi-unit residential parking standards, we're not deviating from what we had before. We're continuing to put multi-unit residential market rate apartments at 1 space per unit in the half mile, subject to change maybe based on those boundaries. And the quarter mile we had put in at 0.75 spaces per unit. And with income restricted properties, workforce housing, we thought we would drop those down by 1/4 for the half mile and 1/4 for the quarter mile. And then for the recommended commercial parking guidelines, we are changing that up. Our proposal is a little bit different this time. Before, for hotel, office, retail, and restaurant, we were actually plugging in parking ratios that were significant reductions from the existing standards. But because we felt that it's a lot less for certain as to what that should be, a lot less predictable, and because there was a little bit of not everybody was totally on board with some of these ratios, we thought that maybe it would be better to go to a more of a guideline system where we would look at percentages to negotiate reductions from. We would still use our existing standards as the base for the most part, except for maybe the restaurant, we'd use a little bit different standard. It's more contemporary. And then we would negotiate within the half mile, a 0 to 25% reduction. And within the quarter mile, we would be looking at a 25 to 50% reduction.
John, can you go back briefly to the restaurant? It looks like, if I'm reading the chart correctly, you are changing the existing standard down. You're splitting it, you're taking it down to 5 places per 1,000, and then after that, you want a up to 25% reduction and a 50% reduction. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Well, my house is 1,200 square feet, and if you just take off 1 bedroom, that would take me about down to 1,000 square feet. And if you are going to basically end up with 50%, you're going to end up with 2.5 spots for my house. I think that that's pretty thin for a successful restaurant to operate. I would prefer to see the reduction from the full 10, but that's just my opinion.
Any other comments on the commercial parking?
Colin?
I believe even at 5 spaces per 1,000 square feet, we were one of the higher in the metro area, right? I don't know if you've got those numbers off. 10, we were like astronomically high. 5, we were still pretty high as it is, but I don't remember if you got that off the top of your head.
Yes. If I was to do a comparison between a lot of different suburbs here in the metro, we would be on the very high side with that figure. It really is, it's probably our worst parking ratio that we have in our code that doesn't make sense and is, it's something that most places have gone to something more closer to the 5 per 1,000 for a restaurant.
Okay, thank you.
But we're reducing that by 25 up to 25% and 50%. Understanding this is all for new builds too, so we really don't know what we're talking about at this point in time. We were talking about the future, and nobody has a really good crystal ball.
And also, again, just in this location.
Right.
Right. We wouldn't be changing the standard for Bellevue and Broadway.
Yeah.
Any other comments on this commercial parking guideline proposal?
I don't see any hands, John.
Just real quick, when you say that these are kind of goals, these would be like you would negotiate with the development, or these are things that we would potentially put into the zoning? I guess, what do you, when you say the goals for reduction, at what point do those become what are applied?
So we would put in the language that this is our TSA goals, and that they would be subject to negotiations. They would not be absolutes. So you're not necessarily guaranteed to get a 25% reduction within the half mile or a 50% reduction in the quarter mile, but those are the ranges that you have that have been set out by P&Z and City Council with that would be used by the city staff to negotiate with developers. So that's how those would work. But it kind of gives, rather than a specific ratio, which we were proposing before, we are now instead creating more of a range, and it could fall anywhere in there based on negotiations.
Thank you.
Diane?
Thank you. I was curious if there is and I apologize if I forget and you had shown it in a previous presentation. Is there maybe a restaurant that you could recommend we look at the parking lot that might have, you know, if we reduce by 25% from the 5, that's 3.75 spaces per 1,000, and then 50 would be 2.5. Do we have like somewhere we could go and say, oh, this is what that looks like? How does that feel? Can we walk and see? Does it seem too clogged? I mean, all of it is a little bit hard to gauge unless we're looking at a true TOD site that's been built out, because there's going to be all kinds of amenities and things that will allow the people who are able-bodied to walk or bike and do all those things, and then others who would need to park their car, like, you know, the people who have triplets and who can't walk well. But I am curious if there's some place you'd recommend we be able to walk and see, or drive and see that.
So would the example need to be a TOD and be something new as opposed to just any place? And would it have to be in Inglewood, or could it be anywhere in the metro?
I mean, I would think it'd be anywhere in the metro. I was just sort of saying out loud that even if you gave us a location to go look at, if it's not in a TOD spot, it may have only some relevance, but it might at least give us a sense of what that feels like. Because sort of,
it doesn't need to be a new construction, or could it be some existing building that was converted into restaurant?
I mean, I think it could be a converted building.
Okay. I think we could probably work on that.
I have a question on that.
Carl, I'm sorry. Kate Townley had her hand up first. I'll come back to you after Kate.
Thanks.
John, can you just help me think about this again? So essentially, these recommendations would be updating all of MUB1.
No, they'd only apply to the TSA, the areas that we've outlined in the quarter mile and the half mile. It would not apply outside of the TSA overlay area.
Okay, and then the TSA overlay area is specific to this site? Or does this apply also to a half mile, quarter mile from Oxford Station?
It would apply to that entire yellow and pink area, the half mile and the quarter mile called out areas would be the entire TSA area.
Okay, that's what I just wanted to see. If we were changing something that's going to apply to 2 different sites, or mainly just to this site, especially if we were thinking at all about changing that half mile, quarter mile part of it. But that helps. Thank you.
Okay, Carl.
The restaurant I'm thinking about, I think it's IHOP down there on Inglewood Parkway. Kind of estimating it's probably 3,000, maybe 4,000 square feet. So does the 5 and 1,000, does that include employees also?
Typically there is no employee requirement. The code, sometimes there are, I think with hotels we may have that as a potential. I'd have to look in that again to see, but for the restaurants, no, it does not take into account spaces for employees versus spaces for visitors. It's just one standard to apply to both.
So the 5 and 1,000, that could be half of that could be taken up by employees. Pretty easily. Yeah, I just wanted to know that. Thank you.
Judy?
Here's my opinion. I don't have a heartburn with commercial stuff bottom line is, other than, the hotel's going to be what it is, but office and retail and restaurants, if a developer is going to try and lease a restaurant space and there's no parking, restaurants aren't stupid. If people can't get to their restaurant conveniently, then they're going to lose clients. If you can just go to downtown Littleton at some cases where you can't find parking to save your soul, and they may not be feeling the pain at this point because people aren't trying to go far from home. But, I've lived in this area for a lot of years, and downtown Littleton has always struggled. And you can see people going in and out of there constantly. And one of the problems is there's no parking. And there never has been, and it's always been a challenge. And so ultimately, from a commercial standpoint, if a developer wants to build a building and not have any parking, at some point, they're not going to have renters for it. So I guess I don't have heartburn with what happens here with commercial. On the residential side, the only reason that I have issues with it is because it starts to overflow into the commercial areas. And then you talk about, who's going to be responsible for managing that. And then I just don't want the burden to fall on the city that we end up having to manage what we're talking about, shared parking with RTD, that now we have to go out there and monitor. I mean, I see that security guy driving around in the parking garage now still, trying to monitor if somebody's parking there for RTD. I don't know, is that our dime? So that's why my issues is with the residential is that's less controllable in the sense that people who are living there need a place to park. I don't have a problem with it going out to a laddie, or as Dan was saying about finding it on lot and block. But to be honest, I'd be more for making the whole thing yellow, whole thing pink before I agree to making whole thing yellow. But, I'm looking at long-term down the line of some other development. And, we have PUDs coming across all the time where we have people asking for variances, but, I'm not going to. I'm tired of talking about parking, but anyways, that's my opinion on the commercial is I don't care what you guys do here, because they'll pay the price with not being able to get companies there. I mean, restaurants who don't have places for parking don't survive. So that'll be on the developer's decision point, I guess. I've never cared about commercial parking all that much. But the residential parking, if it's for me, it's either the way we have it on the quarter and the half mile, or you can stop it at a laddie because it does make sense to have lots be the same requirement. But making the whole thing yellow, I'm not on board with that. So that's just I'm over here in my little world.
Thank you.
Diane?
Yeah, I just was curious with regards to the restaurant and shared parking. I mean, I don't really know how this would work in code language, but would it be possible for, restaurateurs to use valet that, parks at some of these excess parking facilities to make it easier? I mean, I've definitely been to valet or been to restaurants that have valet sort of as part of their service, and really the only additional charge probably is the tip. Anyway, I just point that out as a potential additional shared use.
Yeah, as a practical matter, that's what happens if your restaurants get so popular that all of a sudden you have a shortage of parking, is valet gets implemented. and it pushes the utilization of parking out further. You know, the reality is even these parking ratios are from the old days. I mean, they're from the days when you had a standalone parking lot on an out parcel of a corner of a retail center. You know, I mean, the reality is in a TOD mixed use environment, by the time that you're dealing with peak restaurant hours, there's so much available parking from other uses that's immediately available adjacent. And if those spots are all being used, that's a problem that we, the city, would love to have, because that means we're being successful in attracting people. And as you said, Diane, the valet parking becomes a very practical solution in those situations.
I would just echo Judy's comments, although I'm a little more commercial oriented because that's my background, that residential parking is key, because you've got to go to the grocery store and you need to be able to park somewhat close to where you live so that you can haul all your groceries up. So I just want to support your comments, Judy.
John, I don't see any other hands.
All right. This is my final slide. This is our showing the residential density for the maximum and the minimum within the half mile and the quarter mile. And there may be a negotiation higher through the TSA overlay. And then height, we are proposing 125 feet for both, and that may be negotiated within the quarter mile higher through the TSA overlay. Is there any comments on these particular standards?
I have a question on the height. You had mentioned before that there's a certain limit where the height becomes a lot more expensive. What is that? What is that limit on there?
So typically, were you trying to? Typically, I guess with a stick-built building, typically their heights would be about 6 stories tall. When you go beyond the 6 stories, then you're looking at typically a concrete and steel type of construction, which is much more expensive.
Yeah, the 6 stories would be what, 60 feet?
Yeah, somewhere between 60 and 70 feet.
Okay, so 125 feet, that's going to be a fairly expensive building. Like
it would be
the bank buildings that are down there.
Right.
Would the developers build an apartment building bigger than 6 stories?
They have not shown us that, so we don't believe that would be probable, but there are some developments at some stations that do exceed that are taller. So it is within the realm of possibility. However, what SKB has shown us or talked about has been more at the 6 or 7 story level.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Noel?
Earlier when we talked about expanding the quarter mile all the way up to the half mile line, I know a lot of that was focused on parking. If, I would definitely be eager to see if the parking changes weren't uniform, that things like the height, were uniform across the whole area. I guess my common theme is let's go taller and denser, and I wouldn't want a disagreement around the parking changes to stop at least those density and height pieces from moving forward.
Colin?
I think part of the follow-up, just maybe Carl to clarify, I think if you're gonna go to that 6 stories or taller, they're gonna need to do a few extra stories to make those viable. So an 8-story maybe isn't viable. So if we were only at 80 or 90 feet, might not be as functional as if you go up a couple extra stories to add in a few more feet. So allowing that if they wanted to go to that different methodology, because you're right, it's going to be more expensive, it's going to be more challenging. So by having 80 or 90 foot requirement, you're kind of limiting to 60. And if you're allowing them to go a little bit higher, I think that would be the thought process there.
That was well said.
Meg?
Thanks. I had a question, and just being new, I probably don't have the history. Can you explain the reason for not allowing taller buildings in the half-mile radius? Is it to step down to Broadway, or because that's where some of the taller buildings are currently? So I guess I'm just curious that difference.
We had a whole series of slides that showed different development heights within the metro. And so kind of threw, and then we kind of used those bank buildings as kind of a base. And they are about 120 feet tall. So I think we automatically kind of came to that as a group that, hey, let's start there. And then it also became clear is that commissioners didn't really want to preclude anything with an artificial height. And we kind of decided, okay, well, if we can get more height at the station, we should go for it. And so we decided to have a possibility to negotiate even higher than 125 at the station area. And that's so we kind of applied as a base to the whole area, but said quarter mile within the state, really close to the station. If you want to go higher than that, we'll consider it.
I don't see any other hands, John, at the moment.
I have one more question.
Oh, okay.
This is kind of a general question on density. Is there a density that is a goal density? There is limits on what you can do for infrastructure, the water lines. How many thousands of people can we add to our water system? And how much can we add to the sewer system?
That's a good question.
If you have 2,000 more people and basically at halftime of a Bronco game, if they ever get back to playing, everybody flushes a toilet at halftime and your water pressure goes from 65 to 20. So is that going to be an issue?
The city of Englewood back in the 1970s did some studies in the study that I found, it says that the city's existing infrastructure can support a total population of 60,000 people. So it was designed for significantly larger capacity than for the population that we have today, probably to preclude those kind of issues or problems for the city's growth in the future.
That's water inclusive in there, the fresh water?
Yes, and we have the water supply. The city has rights to more water a lot more water actually than we currently need for our current population. And they purchased water rights to serve a population of approximately probably twice as much as what they had at that time, which was probably around 30,000. So they purchased enough water to serve 60,000 people.
Now, I know that, and especially in a drought summer, the Inglewood sells water to Aurora, Highlands Ranch, and various other places. It would be nice to be able to continue with that instead of using it for added density. I don't know if that would be a factor, but the selling of water, we do make a lot of money on that.
But Carl,
I appreciate your questions, but I think we're getting a little afield of the city center redevelopment at this point. So I'd like to kind of keep us on the
Yeah, it's
agenda
just
item if
the
possible.
infrastructure is basically what I was interested in. Can a density be handled by that? So thank you.
All right, since it's getting late, I'm going to, that's the end of the PowerPoint. And so at this point of the evening, going back to the early slide, what we were asking to the group is, are we ready to conclude our series of study sessions on the city center rezoning? And then are we ready to conclude that series of study sessions? And are we then ready to take the next step, which is to schedule a community meeting and to begin directing staff to start developing the actual ordinance language, which by the way, we would still have a study session for that to go over those proposed red lines. And we would also have had the community meeting, and we would take any feedback that we got there and decide if we wanted to make any tweaks. And then we'd be ready to go on later beyond that and start and hold the public hearing and make a recommendation to council. Are we ready to do that tonight?
Well, I think that in some ways that question can be turned upon you, John and Dan. Do you feel that you got adequate feedback tonight to essentially finalize the recommendations?
Let me see if I can stop sharing the screen here. I'm not figuring that out. There may be a few things, I don't know. We'd have to probably process a little bit more. I think there was some different voices about the boundary, but then at the same time, it kind of came back to, well, let's just keep the boundary. So I'm starting to lean more towards just keeping the boundary as we showed it tonight. So
the pink and yellow is what you're referring to?
Yes.
Or something close to that?
Yes. So I'm thinking we still could go with a decision if that's what the group decides, if they're ready to go to community meeting.
So let me clarify. If we say yes, let me clarify what the next step would be and how much input would we have?
Chair Austin, our city attorney has raised his hand.
Well, I'd love to hear from our city attorney. Thank you, Dugan.
Well, folks, our office is going to have to draft an ordinance, change that zoning, and we need to have some time to be able to do that and to sit down with Dan and John to figure out exactly what that is going to entail. So I would hate to push this to a May or April date when we in our office are actually one person down. So I'd like some time to speak with John and Dan about the timing on this.
Okay.
That's fair enough. I think what we're not really deciding necessarily on what the timing of the next steps are. I think we're just deciding basically, are we ready to move on from these study sessions on city center and start working towards those agreed upon dates?
And if that's the case, will we have an opportunity? I mean, I'm assuming that we're going to have an opportunity to review what the city attorneys come up with and tweak those recommendations.
Yes, as I said, after the community meeting, we would develop those red lines with the city attorney's office in conjunction with them. And then, yes, you would have another opportunity, a study session to go over those, and as well as the feedback from the community meeting.
Right, that would be my next question. Will we be able to take a look at the community feedback at the same time? Okay, great.
Yes.
Questions from the
Yep, Diane?
Yeah, John, you mentioned, I thought you mentioned at some point that on some of these points where it didn't seem like we at council were completely aligned, that there might be some, like we could vote on different options, or would that be something that we do at the community meeting portion, or we just have to have one recommendation for the meeting and that's what we go with?
Yes, I believe that it would better at this point. We would, at the community meeting, we wouldn't want to be confusing the public with multiple options. We would want to have, say, this is what this commission has come up with, and that this is the result, and this is what will be proposed to city council. I don't think we'd want to confuse at this point. So yes, that's kind of where you're at tonight. Are we ready to go forward, or is this not quite there yet?
Dugan, what's your time frame?
Boy, that's a good question. We have got a lot of things coming down from different departments at this point. I've got 4 city ditch issues going on. I've got contracts I'm still reviewing and rewriting. Honestly, I don't know. I'd have to talk with John and Dan and get an idea of where we're going with this. And because it's a zoning change, this board is going to be able to weigh in on that and make decisions and recommendations to council. So I can't give you a hard, fast timeline. I'm probably looking at June, July.
Ooh.
We are slammed. I mean, we are one person down, and we're scrambling to try and get everything. You know, we're getting a lot of things, projects coming through our office that we have to address.
Do you need me to bring you some coffee?
No, I'm fine. I've got plenty of coffee.
Just checking.
I could use 2 warm bodies in our office to help us, but at this point, that's not going to happen for a little bit.
Well, I'm assuming you want warm legal bodies. I don't have any of those around here in my house, so sorry.
Well, that's okay.
We might have a couple for you, Dugan. You know, you may be able to utilize the outside counsel, Kaplan, Kirsch, and Rockwell, to do the basic drafting on the ordinance and associated documents. You know, because that's kind of consistent with their scope. Just a thought.
Yeah, it's not a bad thought, and you know, I'd want to talk about that with Alex, but I think you and I and John and Alex probably need to get together at some point in the near future and discuss the timing on this.
So it doesn't sound like tonight we can resolve the timing on this unless I'm mistaken. Is that correct, John and Dan and Dugan?
No, and we weren't asking you to do that. We were just asking, are we done with study sessions? Basically, are we ready to say we're done with study sessions and we've this is the basically the general bounds of the recommendation that we will proceed with?
So how should we proceed? Do we need a motion to move forward? Nancy, Dugan, I need help on that.
Okay, Chair, I've got Colin and then Kate Townley. who
Let's,
wished to
let's,
speak
let's get the
first.
speaking done.
Thank-
That's great.
Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you.
Thank you both. Dugan, just to make sure I'm understanding, it sounded like you were saying you would rather us move forward now, not wait because of this long lead time that you have. Is that correct?
Well, yeah, I'm not saying that the board shouldn't make, I think what John is asking is the board ready to move? Are we done with the study sessions? Are we done with the informational side of it? And if that's the case, then yes, you can say to John and to Dan and to myself, please, bring us forth a draft ordinance so we can review it and look at it, changing the zoning. That's, I think, where John and Dan are going with this. It's not about we're going to make a decision as to whether or not we should rezone. It's just, are we done with the informational side of this at this point? It's how I'm hearing what John is asking the board to do. And if I'm wrong, John, please correct me.
No, you're exactly right.
And I just wanted to make sure I understood your concern, Dugan, on that. Along those lines, I'd like to say that I feel like because there was a little push for both ways of either going all yellow or all pink, I feel like we've got a nice consensus here, or a nice compromise with, the extent as we have it shown as John's proposed it today. I think we should move forward so that we can then get the city's input and get the public's input and get everyone else's thoughts on that. If at that point we need to make some adjustments, then as we've said, we would get it back at that point. But because, especially because we've got a little bit of push both ways, I feel like we're in a nice middle spot. I'd like to see us moving forward, but I've obviously listened to others' discussions.
And Nancy, you said Kate had?
Yep, Kate Townley.
I keep raising it and lowering it. Sorry.
You're
I just
good.
wanted to check in terms of community input or community meetings as a next step. We don't necessarily need a draft ordinance for that at this phase, would be my guess, that we would have draft language that would inform an ordinance, and then the draft ordinance would have to go through public hearings and things like that anyway as an additional form of engagement.
That would be my understanding, is that we're not going to present the ordinance. We're just going to be talking about, and again, John, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we're just talking about the rezoning or the change in zoning for the development areas.
Yes, I don't think the public would appreciate going over text amendments. No, they would rather, it's more natural for them to talk about it in more of the conceptual level that we've been talking about it for the last 5-6 meetings.
And again, we're just talking about the city center. We're not talking about going up to the medical districts, correct?
No, the medical district, no, it would just be what we've shown. City center would be rezoned to MUB1, and then the TSA would cover a little bit larger area than that, stretching at this point with the yellow and pink that I had showed you, which would not include the Broadway corridor or any place east of there.
Okay. Any other comments from the commission? Carl's got his hands up.
Okay, can you explain a little to me? I'm not sure I understand a community meeting. Is this multiple meetings, various parts of town? Is this going to be a Zoom meeting? What is it going to really consist of?
Yes, it'll need to be a Zoom meeting because we're still in the pandemic, and I'm thinking that it will be. We'll probably need to advertise it to everyone in the city because it's such an important part of the city.
Would that be via a postcard like we've received recently, or?
That decision, I don't think the logistics of that have been decided yet.
Okay, just curious. What else, Carl?
Would it be like certain, like District 1 would be one day, District 2 would be another day? Would it be broken up into the city broken up into districts?
I was not anticipating doing that. I was just anticipating to have a single meeting. I believe that I'm not certain that there would be different interest or different things that people will be interested based on their city council district. So my first inclination is to have one main meeting where everyone can hear everyone.
But it'd only be one meeting. It wouldn't be one meeting and then we get an idea what people want and then fine tune it a little bit and then have another meeting and then get more details. Just one meeting.
Dan is shaking his head no.
Yeah, it's time to keep this train moving.
Well, I think, Dan, I appreciate that. And I think you're right. We do need to keep this train moving. But I think it also might, the feedback might alter that. But we'll see. We don't know.
That's true. And you're right. Feedback, if depending on what that is, could alter. We might have to make an adjustments.
Well, I think you can anticipate some of the feedback you're going to hear because it's the feedback that you always hear. And, you know, the question for the city, its decision makers, its policy makers is, do we want to move forward? Do we want to change? Do we want to keep up? Or are we going to listen to people who, of course, are going to show up and complain about change? I mean, you can pretty well write that script tonight. So just my personal observation there.
You're right in some respects, Dan. There's obviously a portion of the of citizens who don't like any change. I would agree with you. So.
Right.
Kate Townley.
Sorry, I know it's really close to time. I just wanted to say I'm definitely done talking about this for right now and look forward to a community meeting and community input. I think one of the things that's a little bit tricky for me trying to wrap my head around it is that we started with the base rezoning and then are like rezoning to MUB1 and then making changes and reductions and all of that. If I wasn't on planning and zoning and a community member coming to that and saying, oh, well, here you have this many parking spaces. Now they're reducing it, but essentially this is a whole new area. It's a whole new zone district. And this is my opinion. I think it would make more sense to present it like that at a meeting instead of these are the reductions we're going for and things like that, because we're zoning for a very unique downtown or city center area, which deserves its own, uses and parking ratios and things like that. So I would just keep that in mind for those community meetings, because I think trying to follow the line of it makes sense to us, but I think it may be very difficult for people to kind of follow how this goes.
Kate, that's advice well taken. And my assumption is that both John, Dan, and the rest of city staff want to make this as easy to understand as possible, because I think that they want to keep moving forward. Am I mistaken in that, guys?
Perfectly
No.
stated.
Judy?
I agree. It's time to move on. I feel like we've beat this dead horse. I will say, we've been appointed to planning and zoning by the city council for the reason that we're supposed to be the ones that dig into the details and understand this. And Kate's exactly right, in my opinion, that we need to make this straightforward, one community meeting. This isn't about, I have visions of this turning into short-term rental regulations, and that's really not the point of this. I mean, we're here to do a job that we've been appointed to do, and it's our job to do it. And yes, we want to hear what the community has to say, but in some respects, we are going to just hear the people that will never agree with any new development ever. It doesn't matter what it is. Or, if they just wanted to get rid of the fountain, we'd probably have to have 30 community meetings. So, we just have to present this, that we've done our job as a planning and zoning commission. We're asking for the community to help us see the spots where we might have missed, but that this is what's best for Englewood, and how we present that to the community is going to be essential. But you're right, we can predict exactly who's going to be there and exactly what they're going to say in many cases. But really who we want to hear from are the people who might have some insight that maybe we've missed because we've been in the weeds too long. That's my opinion, but yeah, I'm ready to move on as well.
Nancy, is anybody else have their hand up?
Not that I'm seeing.
Okay. So Nancy, I will defer to you. What do we need to do? Do we need to make a motion and a vote, or we just generally agree to move forward, or what's the procedure that we need to follow?
Dugan, please correct me, but since we're in study session, we cannot vote, correct? We can just do a consensus.
Yeah, that would be the way to do it. Just get a consensus from the members to say, please move forward with the next steps on presenting, or drafting the ordinances or whatever we need to do.
Okay. So I will
I'm
follow
sorry.
Dugan's comments. And is there anybody who has a burning desire to not proceed? We're not going to vote. We're just going to get comments. I think Diane's hands up.
I'm clapping to move forward.
Oh, it's a clap up there. Okay, all right. All right, I'm going to make the assumption that everybody's ready to move forward then. There was another document to be presented, Colin's thumbs up too, that was on our agenda. Are we going to abandon that and save that for the next meeting, or?
Was that under staff's choice?
I believe it was. I have to.
Those were Wade can address those, but I believe they were just informational.
Okay, Wade? Wade, wake up.
Caught me off guard there. No, yeah, those were just informational reading materials for you all to look through.
Okay.
There was no discussion needed or anything about that.
Okay, it's nice to see your smiling face.
Thank you. Nice to see yours as well.
Yeah, we missed you. Okay, then I'm going to move forward to attorney's choice.
I have nothing else to add, but I take it I didn't hear this before we went to Wade, and I just want to make sure we have a consensus from the board to have John and Dan and our office and other staff move forward with getting these ordinances and things done. Is that correct?
That's what I heard.
Okay. And then I have nothing else to add to the conversation tonight.
Okay. Staff's choice?
I have nothing.
Dan is
No.
shaking his head.
No, thank you.
Okay. Commissioner's choice. Carl?
Whoops, Wade, did you have anything?
I do not.
Oh, I'm
Okay.
sorry. Thank you.
I have nothing.
Judy?
I'm saying it again, Englewood Leadership Exchange, Thursday, March 4th. They're going to have a panel discussion on co-housing. So it could be very interesting. So that's this Thursday. It is, just a second, 5 to 6 p.m. So it's going to be on Zoom. You can find it on Facebook, or I can forward it to you, but that's always my pitch. Other than that, that's it.
Thank you, Judy, for keeping us apprised of what the chamber is doing and all of the other entities. That's wonderful. Thank you. Kate Fuller?
I don't have anything. Thank you, guys.
Noel? I'll try not to call on you twice this time, okay?
Nothing further.
Diane?
No more impassioned pleas for one evening.
Kate Townley?
Nothing for me. Thank you.
Meg Donaldson?
I'm good, thank you.
Colin Haggerty?
I am also good. Thank you.
And I am good as well. Carl has his
Carl,
hand
yep.
up and waving at me. Are you waving goodbye? So Carl would like the meeting to be adjourned. Without any further discussion, I declare the meeting adjourned. Thank you all so much for attending.
Have a good night.
Good night.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you, guys.
Everyone.